I'm Tom Martin, and welcome to another episode of A San Francisco Conservative, the new podcast series featuring yours truly, Tom Martin. I'm a lifelong journalist. I've produced stories for ABC News, CNN, and CBS News, and my co-host, author David Parker from San Francisco. David is the author of two great books, Income and Wealth and A San Francisco Conservative, a new book of essays coming very, very soon. And welcome, David. Great to see you.
Thank you. Great to see you too.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. One topic that's very much on my mind today, again, from all my days in television journalism, especially Washington, D.C., covering Congress and so on, is now that the Republicans have a little more power in Congress, one of the topics that's risen to the sort of the top of the agenda is school curriculum. A lot of people are talking about critical race theory, saying, the white children shouldn't be made to feel guilty coming home like, oh my gosh, look what we did to, oppressed minorities and so on. And I'm sure there are many in the African-American community who said our heritage should be told. But you spent more than 40 years, more like 50 years as a public school educator there in the Bay Area. And what in your view should be in the public school curriculum?
Yeah, I have strong feelings about that. Every nation in the world centers their core curriculum on the history and culture of that nation. America should be teaching British and American democracy. It's a fascinating and an amazing subject. And every child in the nation should be learning the same thing. And wherever they are in the world, wherever they are in the country, they have that in common. The French education minister made an announcement once in France, not that long ago, that France should not look to America with their emphasis on multiculturalism, that the French schools will teach French culture, which is very strong, and French history, so all students have something in common, and they will love their country. It's a kind of patriotism without being overly, you just can't help it when you study the culture of your country. And that's what America should do. Every child should have a big background in the British and American democracy and its history. And American Blacks are part of American history. But
there are many. I mean, obviously, many inspiring characters and inventors and educators, and again, it can't resist jumping in. I might have told you this, some months ago, but a friend of mine, also a white gentleman in Virginia, collected a lot of African-American historic memorabilia, Harriet Beecher Stowe. One of the characters I'd never heard of before until I saw his vast collection was Madam C.J. Walker. And she was one of the first business success stories. And this was long before integration and so on.
Right. It's because if you single any group out, you're going to make the nation, whoever they are, start to dislike that group if you're constantly being made to behave differently. It's going to backfire. The Republicans are slowly rising in power. It's 50-50, but within the next 30 years, they're going to pass that 50-50 mark, and the nation is going to be pretty much Republican. And it's going to backfire on the Democratic Party by pushing that critical race theory, because slaves came to North America and South America, but a quarter of the slaves came to North America. 3/4 went everywhere else. And out of all the slaves that were shipped, 50% went west, 50% went east for the last 900 years. It's not as if America is the only country that had a little slavery. We're probably the only country that feels bad about it and it was willing to acknowledge we did that and apologize. I'm sure in Brazil and all over where they had far more slaves, they're not even talking about it. So we're making a big mistake.
Yeah.
We are a multicultural nation. We don't talk about the Chinese every day. We don't talk about the Jews. We don't talk about the Irish. We only talk about the Blacks. We should stop doing that. They're just part of history. When it comes up, we talk about it.
Yeah, a few things come to mind. No, this is a very interesting subject. Obviously, Um, Currently, so many people, perhaps more liberals than Trump supporters, for example, talk about polarization. There's real, divisiveness. People seem to have short tempers these days, and accusations being hurled at one another and so on. And I just thought it was very interesting what you said about France, saying let's acknowledge that our school curriculum can be a unifier, and we need that right now. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. And we have division and in left wing and right wing nuts actually seems to be almost in Congress, because we're not facing the main issue, is that our Constitution is such a great document, and the progressives think we have moved on from something, and conservatives says we have not moved on. That's a huge mistake. And that's what and then districts are so gerrymandered in this nation that no Democrat is running against a Republican, and no Republican is running against a Democrat. They're running against each other, and they each get more outlandish. The most outlandish wins. So we have a Congress that doesn't represent the nation at all. The nation is moderate. It's not fringe left and fringe right, and you wouldn't know it by watching the news.
Yeah, no, good point. I want to circle back to again what is being taught, at the various levels in public schools and so on. It's interesting. There's a motivational speaker I really like. He's kind of an old timer at this point, Brian Tracy, and I heard him talk about that expression, warts and all. Was it a portrait artist? Was it Vermeer or Rembrandt or someone? So the nobleman said, "I want you to capture me as I really am, warts and all." And so when we live in an age where people are taking down Confederate statues, we're renaming military bases and so on, and I can understand that to a large degree. But again, as you and I know, people say, well, Thomas Jefferson was a genius, and we certainly wouldn't be enjoying democracy were it not for Jefferson and so on. But he had slaves there at Monticello and so on. How should we look at that kind of history?
They were the founding fathers were born in their estates, and they had slavery. They fought a Revolutionary War. They had a lot on their mind. They were writing a constitution. And you could say they kind of dropped the ball on that. They didn't want to start a civil war with the South, who they just fought side by side with to defeat the British. Now that we did that, let's start all over again. Let's kill all our brothers in the South right away. The timing wasn't right. It took a few more years, and we did that. The slavery is not new, and you can't condone it. But they just dropped the ball. Their mind was elsewhere. They were born with it. Jefferson's father was a very poor business person. The property was mortgaged to the hilt. Had Jefferson freed his slaves, he would have had to sell all of Monticello. The University of Virginia wouldn't have been written. He wrote a great book called Notes on the State of Virginia. The British government recognized Thomas Jefferson as a genius, as you said, when he was a very young man. And he says, what is happening in this country? Tell us everything that's happening in this country. You, Thomas Jefferson, as a young man. And he wrote Notes on the State of Virginia. And Jefferson was very, very moved by the Native Americans, which is why the Lewis and Clark expedition went so well. He put women on the boats. He knew how to talk to them. He respected the Indians, and they helped him with that expedition. And when he was also young, he says, he made like almost a side, make no mistake, Jefferson said, Black people are absolutely no different than us. Make no mistake. When he got older, he got a little bit sloppy about that, and maybe even said the opposite. But if you go to the Jefferson Memorial, there was an article in the New York Times. Someone says, take down the Jefferson Memorial and put up Harriet Tubman or something like that. That person probably had never been to the Jefferson Memorial. You go inside of it and you look up on the roof. It says, this nation is going to pay a big price for the slavery, and we should end it right away. That's Jefferson talking. The memorial says that right on there. You can make a memorial for Tubman alongside, fine, but you don't tear it down. So talking like that, the public schools talk like that, and students are hearing stuff like that these are just old white misogynist slave owners. We've moved on from that stuff. That's what kids are learning. They're not respecting the genius and greatness of George Washington and all the founding fathers. They're not respecting it. It's taught in a very flippant, laughing, mocking way.
Interesting. Yeah, there's a couple of things I want to follow up here. This is quite interesting. I just want to throw in sort of midstream here. If you're watching or listening to this podcast episode, this is A San Francisco Conservative, the title of our podcast series. And it's also the title of author David Parker's second book, which is an excellent book, highly recommended. If you're watching this on our YouTube channel, I hope you hit subscribe so you're alerted every time we post a new episode, and there's room for comments, obviously. And again, be sure to visit David's website, davidparkeressays.com, where you can read about both of his books, Income and Wealth and A San Francisco Conservative. But I want to circle back a little bit. This might sound like, I'm going off on a tangent here a little bit, but again, not long ago, people really focused on the World Cup soccer tournament, every 4 years, like the Olympics. One of my good friends was a huge soccer fan. And so it was hosted this time around in Qatar. And so certainly in the news, there was some talk saying that Qatar, being a wealthy nation right now, of course, wants to whitewash or sports wash history and not mention the hundreds of people, perhaps thousands, who died building these stadiums and suppression and so on. Before we started recording this episode, we were talking about China a little bit, and again, there's suppression of certain minorities in China, as we know. Is there a risk of kind of whitewashing American history, so to speak? I mean, I know you've mentioned de Tocqueville, and he was concerned about slavery. And what are your thoughts on all that?
I don't believe we're whitewashing history. We do talk about blacks every day, and public schools are talking about slavery. That's fine. It has to be talked about. De Tocqueville's great book, Democracy in America, he starts off by saying, idiots, get rid of that slavery right now, because you are about to become the greatest nation that has ever existed, and you're going to ruin it. You are the most responsible people. There's nothing like what you're doing here that exists in Europe, where the average farmer sitting in a log cabin is reading the newspaper and discussing international affairs. That doesn't exist anywhere in Europe. This is about you are going to be a great nation. Get rid of that slavery. So that's part of our history. Everyone knows we shouldn't have done it. It was never necessary. All you have to do was pay the minimum wage, which wasn't very much. And then, yeah.
Yeah, no, interesting.
No reason for it.
Yeah, no, excellent. We have a couple of minutes left in this episode, and I just wondered if there are any other thoughts you have with respect to school curriculum reform. Again, the Republicans, claiming a little more power now, seem to be putting this at one of the top spots on the agenda. Again, and a lot of people are talking about critical race theory, but maybe there are other aspects of what a really good public school curriculum should be. Do you have any advice or suggestions?
Well, what I said earlier, that British and American history and democracy should be the core. But also the public schools have dropped standards. And not unrelated, we're trying to be more inclusive. So schools are under administrative order not to be flunking students and not to be suspending students left and right. It has an overturn of racism. So teachers don't. And they handle the problems creatively in class. But that's another skill. It's called classroom management skill. And you can't be teaching a creative lesson and allow a little bit of discussion and back and forth and a little noise when you're trying to control a class of kids who would otherwise be rowdy. So you have all the good students leading. And then so not to flunk students, the standards have dropped. We are the lowest nation of the developed nations academically, test scores. All the great jobs, all important jobs are going to, in Silicon Valley, 71% are going to foreigners. Our American schools can't We're not producing students anymore.
Yeah. When
Huge mistake.
in your, I'm sorry to interrupt. When in your day, when you spent 40 plus years as a public school teacher there in San Francisco in the public schools, you were a music teacher and you're a gifted musician, as we know. But did you have any way that you approached, the kind of the whole melting pot? You had students from many different backgrounds. I mean, San Francisco is well known as being a great melting pot. How did you approach that?
I just treated all students equally. I grew up and live and work to this day in a multicultural environment. I prefer that. But in my class, I held high standards and I got reprimanded because I often flunked students. Here was the assignment, you didn't do it. And I started teaching, and this is what I assigned. I had a winter and a spring concert for my musicians, and I always had 2 or 3 pieces on the program. At the end of my teaching career, I had 1 or 2 pieces on my program, and I fought that until I stopped fighting it. The standards just dropped, and I wasn't expected. I got in trouble for upholding higher standards. I taught inner city schools, and my students played as well as the upper middle class schools played. I was the only person, and people put pressure on me to stop doing that. You're making it rough for us.
Wow. Well, I guess to close out our conversation today, I just want to kind of fast forward a few years. Do you ever hear from some of those students? Maybe you push them a little hard, saying, "I know you've got greatness in you. You need to try a little harder. You're capable of more than that." Do you ever hear from any of those students?
Well, yeah, I heard from a student once. I was doing a graduation performance at one of my schools, and the whole family was there, not just the child. And then one of my ex-students was there, and I says, "Hey, how you doing? I remember you were in my class. You didn't do that well, but I think I singled you out because I thought you could do well." He says, "Well, that was the most important thing you ever did in my life because I just got out of San Quentin. I've been there for 20 years. And I had a sign in my room from Mr. Parker says, you can do it."
Wow. That's
whoa.
amazing.
I says, so there it is. Yeah.
Amazing. And I bet you hear from many students quite often. You said you still live in the same area right there where you.
Yeah, I live and work where I teach. Yeah, I'm not commuting from some suburb. I'm hanging out. Like students and families catch me at the Sunfat Fish Market on Mission Street.
Fantastic. I love it. Well, great conversation as always. I appreciate it very much. And I just want to remind our viewers and listeners, be sure to visit David's website, davidparkeressays.com. You can learn how to purchase copies of his books, Income and Wealth and A San Francisco Conservative, right there on the website. You can also purchase them, of course, through Amazon.com. Please subscribe to this website, to our podcast series. You can do that on the YouTube channel, the San Francisco Conservative, the podcast. And any closing words for us, David?
Well, my closing words, if you read my books, what you'll appreciate is that I give examples from the past. The same problems we have existed in the Age of Enlightenment, 18th century, existed in Rome, 1st century, and existed in Athens, 5th century BC. Those are 3 great periods in human history. Same problems, same discussions. People, all those authors and people talk and sound like us is unbelievable. And because I'm a person who's been very successful in business, I give examples from business as opposed to academic examples. So the combination of those two make my books very interesting reading, in my opinion.
Absolutely. No, I totally agree. Well, always a pleasure. And I look forward to our next conversation. Thank you.
Me too. Thank you.